Welcome back for some more Angelica lore. Wow, this past episode definitely brought out some fascinating discussion in the comments section. Most of the comments show an absolute adoration for Angelica, which is aptly put. However, the most notable comment that I want to bring attention to is from, and I'm going to say this incorrectly, Hakurai Araragi. I think that's probably like 90% correct, but you can correct me. Who has been posting quite frequently in my videos about major lore developments. Apparently, Smilegate had a website that outlined the entire genesis of Epic 7 lore, but was shut down near the end of Episode 2 because it revealed far too many spoilers and included lore that involved Angelica. So once I am made known to this information, I will definitely chronicle it all in a video to talk about what has stayed the same, and if there are any tiny changes that may have happened since the website was taken down. To be perfectly honest, I'm hoping that Smilegate does intend to make little changes or add little things here and there, so that there's at least some mystery to the plot. I hope that I'm not going to be spoiling literally everything, but just to provide a greater context to the story that we are viewing now. Okay, let's continue onward with, at this point, the most prolific side story to date for lore on Angelica. In fact, it's just enough to start pondering a legitimate theory. So, let's get into some lore. In our last video, we went through the Small Miracle and Elegy for a Saint side stories, and found that Angelica has been teased for having a mysterious past, even though the mainstay story would give zero hints as to what this past entailed. As a short recap, we learned that in the early days of the Church of the Goddess, there was a girl that was afflicted with an incurable disease, with the same name as Angelica, and was not going to make it to the end of the year. Fast forward to the Archdemon War, and Angelica is, for whatever reason, out in the woods, and runs into Basque as he is searching for an ill Diane. She assists in healing Diane and then proceeds to speak very strangely about the Church of the Goddess, almost as if she's alluding to her own past. She then attempts to encourage Diane out of her own self-debilitating attitudes, and ultimately is the one that sets Diane on the path towards meeting up with the Nocturnes, and thus truly becoming the saint that she was acting out. She makes it awkwardly obvious, Angelica does at times with her dialogue, like she is just curious to see what happens when she does certain things or says certain things to certain characters, like a god playing with the pieces on a board game. Today, we are going to expose the most recent side story that includes Angelica. In order to truly understand the information presented in this side story, a little more context must first be given. The side story begins as a fun, lighthearted tale of the Holy Order alongside Euphine, whipping out their swimsuits and teasing one another on how unchurch-like they appear. Of course, we always have to start off with some fan service. Mui introduces herself as the island caretaker and informs them all of the areas that they are allowed to venture on. To make a long story short, something mysterious begins happening on the island in a restricted zone, and Euphine, being the curious dragon that she is, heads off to investigate. A strange mist also eventually surrounds the island, trapping them all inside. I'm going to be leaving out a lot of in-story details, like how the group meets DJ Basar and Faithless Lytica on the island as well. So go find the side story on YouTube if you want the full take. Anyways, eventually we are introduced to Sinful Angelica, who is from another dimension, and is the cause of the purple mist. She is searching for our Angelica in order to become one. How I understand this to be is that Sinful Angelica and our Angelica are products of the same event happening in two different dimensions of Orbis. Some spirit or interdimensional entity called the Memory of the Lost is interacting with what appears to be a weak girl who is dying, who is possibly an orphan under the wing of the church clergy. They have a conversation about life and death and how the little girl is content with who she is and happy that she is able to have a relationship with the spirit. She proposes that the spirit should inhabit her body and take over her life because she's dying anyways. The spirit retorts that eventually everyone would find out, but then suggests that maybe they could become one being. This is how our Angelica came to be. Sinful Angelica, named in the flashback as a bygone mystery, was born out of the same interaction, except the girl that the spirit inhabited, named Another Weak Girl, was one that was full of spite and hatred for the world that had put her in such a deathly state. Sinful Angelica attempts to force our Angelica into a ritual, but the rest of the Holy Order is able to rescue her. Euphine and Montmorency are able to set up their own ritual by sending Sinful Angelica back to her own dimension through a mirror. There is so much here to talk about, so I'll try to be brief yet still go over all of the important bits that I could find. From our last video, we talked about the possibility of Angelica being that girl in the church's abbey, and from this side story, we can now confirm that that is the case. It makes me wonder if Angelica escaped the abbey and shortly after ran into Basque because she seems to still be getting used to her name from her dialogue. She also has a more existential attitude towards the current situation than the other characters do, where she seems to just be playing around, seeing what influence she can have on the denizens of Orbis, like she does with Diane. She also could have just been hiding out in the forest for who knows how long after escaping the abbey. In this particular side story, however, Angelica does not seem to be acting the same way she acts around others. In front of Sinful Angelica, her words are no longer slurred and elongated like they normally are. They're almost weary and kinda guarded. She appears to act and speak differently when dealing with someone who knows her true identity. Sinful Angelica has lots to reveal, and she doesn't do it sparingly either. She exposes the fact that Angelica was once a higher form entity, and even goes so far as to say that the Celestials would be nothing compared to her if she were to regain her true self. Many Redditors have postulated that these two characters joined together could bring about an entity known as Fate, that is of the highest form compared to every other Celestial we've encountered so far. I'll have a link to another video when it comes out about the genesis of Epic 7's story later down the line, but from my perspective, I think that this entity could be even higher than the Primus star. This is all evidenced by Angelica herself during the conversation with Sinful Angelica. She says,
"You know what I mean when I say goddess, fate has many names."
This suggests that Fate is an actual character and not just a concept, and that Angelica is not referring to Dice when she says goddess. Fastus's goal also involved finding an item on Orbis in order to defeat such a beyond god entity. There is also mention of destiny in the Chandra prophecy in episode 2, which could also be interpreted as fate as well. Sinful Angelica goes on to proclaim that once they become one, they will be able to face the creator of everything, which could definitely be the widest scope of where the Epic 7 narrative could go by episode 10. This suggests to me that there are beings higher than the Celestials that exist outside of the dimensions, and can therefore travel between them. Although Assassin Cartusia and Watcher Shuri can create their own Chaos Gates as celestial beings, I do think that they are using a power that is foreign to their innate beings themselves. Unfortunately, just as Sinful Angelica was about to tell the other members of the Holy Order about the true identity of their leader, Achades and the rest of the Order are able to complete the ritual and send Sinful Angelica back to her own dimension. Unfortunately, there really isn't much to say about Angelica in the main story. She plays out her role as the High Priestess of the Ezran Conclave, encouraging the heroes and providing her expertise from the perspective of the Church of the Goddess, in order to protect the people. She overall appears to have an outgoing demeanor, while still being very pointed and intentional with her words and mannerisms. She mainly appears in scenes that involve the rulers of Ezra making decisions on current events, such as when to send Ezran troops to protect other lands, and during the attack on Straze in Episode 2. She is constantly available to give her input, but does not reveal any lore bits about her past during these exchanges. In this side story, Angelica is only hinted at, as the entire side story is made up of multiple smaller stories told by Sage Bal to an audience. The first story involves Last Rider Crow and Operator Sigrid investigating our version of Terranor and discovering the old research facility that housed the homunculi. The next story, which is the one that matters for this video, is Sage Bal's personal story with Crimson Armin shortly after his escapades in the Nixeed Sanctum, where we encounter him in the labyrinth. This story is titled The Angel and the Sage. Very curious. Crimson Armin finds Bal at home and implores him to go into the forest with her because her mercenaries saw a bright light. As they get closer to the light, it engulfs them, and Sage Bal notes that this light is not of their world. This all takes place in a different dimension than the Orbis that we're familiar with, of course. Sage Bal, of course, uses his power to be able to see through the blinding light and make out a description.
Oh, it looks like the silhouette of a human body, and it's too soon to be sure, but it may be a small girl with long hair. And is this a wing?
Just then, Cezanne begins to shake, and they suddenly are thrust into a chaos gate. They fight through the unknown until they reach the other side, and Bal says that he thinks the Chaos Gate was created intentionally in order to seal away the girl producing the light, which is coming from a lump of light, as Armin puts it. They then spot a bunch of posters, all with the same face on them, and Sage Bal says that they are all the face of Cezanne before he abruptly ends the story. What is curious to me here is that Crimson Armin then reprimands Bal for giving away important information, and then says that she was relieved that he did not tell the audience about Angelica, which comes out of nowhere. This has led many to believe that the lump of light is the angelic Angelica that was teased at the beginning of the year. Unfortunately, that is all the vague information we get from this story, as Sage Bal wants to leave some more stories for the next mystical Moonlight Theater. The only bit of speculation I can suss out here is that Sage Bal might have lied about the posters having Cezanne's face on them, and that it was actually Angelica's face, but there is no evidence to corroborate that. This whole side story feels to me like Smilegate telling the community that Angelica's story is going to be fleshed out very slowly, like a drip feed, which to me is both encouraging and infuriating. And that, unfortunately, my fellow heirs, marks the end of our journey into Angelica's lore up to the end of episode 3. If you think I missed anything significant or missed anything altogether, please jot it down in the comments so that I can add it to my own library of lore to enjoy, and so that everyone else here will be enlightened as well. Discovering new lore bits like this is what keeps me from ripping my hair out when I'm rolling for new gear or trying to win speed battles in Arena. So any help with that is appreciated. If you learned something new or was just dropping by for some lore, do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more Epic 7 lore. This is probably the largest little thing in Orbis that I'll be covering, and when more information is released, I will definitely keep you all informed. And with that, I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, keep it real.